bring in Carrie Krawiec. She's a therapist over at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, more people like are becoming aware of germs and becoming like germ phobias. Is it germ phobiacs or phobias?
It carries a couple of different names. So, historically you would say hypochondriac, and we say germphobic, or illness, anxiety. It's got a lot of sort of names in the community.
It does, but I will say though, I remember back at the beginning, you totally changed how you looked at everything because we didn't know where the virus was. We were being told to wipe down our groceries and anything that came into the house. And so do you think that's increased phobias within our community now?
Sure. Like you said, for sure, it heightened awareness, it heightened vigilance. Anxiety in its purest form is really a good thing. It helps to prepare us for protecting ourselves. So when we feel a little bit of stress or anxiety is our fight or flight response, readying us to take on some new stress, which, like you said, at the start of COVID, we were all experiencing that extra sensitivity to our surroundings and the world around us, extra protective of ourselves and our loved ones. So the difference between that kind of anxiety, especially in the beginning when the information hadn't caught up to the instructions that we were given, everybody was much more aware of the potential of getting sick. So when we think about the people now who are experiencing a high degree of anxiety, the information has changed. It's become more lax. We're getting feedback even from the most highest respected physicians saying some of these things are okay. And when you start to wonder if it's a concern is when people have remained that early rigidity and that very heightened stance, even though the evidence isn't really suggesting that's necessary anymore.
But do you think too that changing information that's come out from our physicians and the CDC, is it kind of added to the anxiety for some people?
For some, I think because we get constant information in that. So, we think of, germophobia is related closely to obsessive compulsive disorder, and the people who do that, like you were talking about with Tyler, that obsessive washing and cleaning, that's the compulsion is the cleaning, but the obsession is the thinking about it. And when we get all this information, then we obsess over each detail, one mask versus two masks versus no, you just every time, and you're getting that information so much. And of course, we're getting it via our media and our computers and those things, that sometimes the best advice is that we're actually getting too much contact with the information, not with the germs.
Yeah, Carrie Krawiec with us here on the MegaCast. She's a therapist over at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, if I can ask, we're 14 months into this. When should someone understand that it's just being concerned versus they need to seek help?
Sure. I think if you're in the realm of being preventative and protective, you're okay. But if you're in the realm of panic, like say, for example, you go somewhere and there isn't hand sanitizer ready available and you are in panic or total distress, or the thoughts are really consuming you and you're deeply uncomfortable. If you're in panic, you're really outside of what's normal. If you're just like, can handle it, if it's going to be a few minutes or a few hours or whatever it is, and you're going to be okay on the other side, that's one thing. But if you feel like you cannot be okay, that's another, especially as we're also resuming a little more normalcy. People who are continuing to let it intrude in their lives. Now, of course, we all let it intrude in our lives when we had to leave work and school and all those things. But now as families are rejoining, friends are rejoining, if you're still refusing to do any sort of form of life, that's probably a concern. And if it's disrupting your family's life as well, and they're saying, hey, something's up here, that would also be a concern.
Yeah, and so with that too, do you think for some of the people, can you develop a new phobia, or did they already have maybe underlying concerns prior to the pandemic and this just made it more noticeable?
Probably a little bit of both. Close to half of the population could be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So it's possible that some are predisposed to anxiety, and that those who are predisposed to anxiety felt that uptick, like I said, as everybody became more anxious and as they should have at the start. For some, depending on what happened, they might be experiencing trauma or post-traumatic stress as well. If they lost a loved one or became severely ill, or someone they know became severely ill, that may be a whole new thing, right? Where their response to the virus and germs in general is a traumatic response because they're afraid of recurrence.
So with that as well, what about people? I have some friends that the thought of going into a crowd
Mm-hmm.
right now sends them into a panic. It's no way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, right, once upon a time, we would have maybe thought that that would be sort of like diagnosable as a problem, but maybe right now that's still within the realm of reason. Are there ways they can protect themselves in a comfortable way? Are there ways that they can de-escalate that panic? Is probably okay. I think in some ways it's trust your intuition. If you don't feel comfortable, if it's too crowded, too close, too enclosed, then you're still within like sort of what's normally expected right now during a pandemic. But if it like I said, if it's not meeting those criteria and you're still in a panic, that's probably more of a concern that it could be some irrational worry as opposed to a real worry.
Yeah, because with that too, especially when we start to think about crowds again, it gets confusing because of the vaccination. You can wear a mask, not wear a mask, but also social distancing. We've been taught over the past 14 months not to be within 6 feet of
Mm-hmm.
people, but even that information is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for some people, it's the confusion that could add to the panic and the phobia.
Sure, and obviously a want, I think we're also experiencing the kind of anxiety of this like sort of want for sameness or the fear of missing out. You see other people doing things, you want to do it, but you are deeply anxious about it. And it's hard to bridge that gap between what you're comfortable with and what everyone else seems to be doing. So a lot of people are having a lot of anxiety about that. I'm encountering a lot of couples and families even having conflicts in their relationships because one is more open than the other to taking those steps forward to reentry.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some of those conversations going on
Hmm.
just within friends,
Hmm.
even. And so, with that, do you think that people that maybe develop these new phobias throughout the pandemic, will they go away or could they manifest into something else?
I think it's probably a spectrum for all kinds of people. For some, as they begin to have exposures in the world to either themselves pushing themselves into the next step of what they're comfortable with and kind of gradually increasing their comfort towards reentry, as they begin to tolerate one stage or the next, they will feel more comfortable and they'll feel that they have the skills or tools to protect themselves to the degree they need to. So for some people, as they walk through that process, it will go away. For others, the potential for it to escalate even would be there. The more isolated they stay, the more obsessive they become. Like I said, it's like a virus; they're just constantly circling in that information. And for those people, it could certainly worsen
So,
over time.
and with that, Carrie, too, we know that the people suffering from these phobias, you talked about when they should seek help, but also for the people that are around them. How should they react and respond? Because if we, kind of say, oh, you're just overreacting, does that make it worse for them?
It can, and I think, yeah, right now, especially at the start of this, many of the people who had the tendency to feel this way about germs to begin with felt very validated because they said, "See, I've been behaving this way all along. I was right all along." And so it will be hard to sort of break down some of those walls because they actually felt sort of emboldened, empowered in their germ phobic status that they were doing the right thing. I think that I think one would be to be kind and compassionate to say, well, like what do we know, or what steps can we take, or what would be just a small gesture towards reentry, kind of doing baby steps one at a time. I think, right, to call someone overreacting, then they're just going to counter argue you with all the reasons why they're right. So then you're just in an argument, and that's not really helpful. So we say like, okay, yes, of course we know germs exist. And actually, the positive of this last year is that many families have experienced less infection because we haven't had as much flu or common cold or any of the normal things because we've been protecting ourselves. So we say, yes, look at how great we've done within reason. How can we do more of that without prohibiting our life moving forward?
It really is going to be an interesting conversation as we continue to emerge out of the pandemic, but we also do know that we are still in the middle of it.
Mhm.
So, is this something, if you're observing maybe a family member going through one of these situations, do you allow for it to continue until we're completely in the clear? Because to some degree, they may be right. Maybe they don't want to be in a group, or maybe they do still want to be washing their hands. So at what point in time, I guess what I'm asking is, if I'm observing a family member that has, that has begun to show signs of these phobias because of the pandemic, at what point in time do I try to convince them they need help? Because we are still kind of in the middle of this crisis.
Sure. I mean, I think what beautiful timing that you're doing this piece today after, the orders for the mask orders changed on Saturday and then moving towards changing as of July 1st, that this would be a really good time to work with those family members who are struggling to say, let's prepare ourselves for this time, July 1st. And then in the event July 1st comes and it's like a hard stop, can't do it, can't, abide with whatever new normals or most people are, returning to work and returning to school and those things, then it would be a sign. So it's let's just get a little bit of comfort now while things are still sort of safe-ish, so that we can feel very confident when things become more closer to the normal we had experienced before, which is each person gets to choose for themselves how to best protect themselves.
Carrie Krawiec with us here on the MegaCast. She's a therapist over at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. And Carrie, are you seeing people with an increase of phobias? Is it mostly adults or kids as well?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I think it depends on the context. If they have elderly or aging parents, if they have immune compromises, some of those anxieties makes more sense because there really is a heightened threat level for those families. So, yes, certainly children are experiencing this. They have anxiety now. Even vaccinated grandparents are seeing their grandkids, but the grandkids don't feel comfortable because all along they were told they couldn't see their grandparents because they could make them sick. So kids are pushing back, even though they want to, because they feel still so afraid, because obviously the messages were scary to all of us, but you think then through the eyes and mind of a child, like it's big. Every time I have a 6-year-old, he sees like a kind of a spore looking ball, he says, is that coronavirus? Because you always see that picture on the news of so yeah, it's so for them, what it means could be so different. So certainly kids are experiencing that, but adults are too. And, I think adults experience more of the social stuff too. What do I do if I don't feel comfortable with my coworker? What do I do if I don't feel comfortable with my husband's parents, but he does, and those kinds of things are causing people a lot of distress too, not necessarily about the virus and contracting it, but also how to manage those uncomfortable conversations. People with babies are feeling very anxious. They're already postpartum. They've been pregnant through the pandemic. They've had their infants through the pandemic. And now is the time people want to see their babies, and they are not doing well with it at all.
Wow, see, there are so many facets throughout the COVID-19 crisis, and I really think it can be years
Mhm.
before we really emerge from this. But as we've talked about before, I think one of the great things that has been happening throughout the entire pandemic is opening up the discussion to talk about mental health. Let's remove the stigma. Everyone is suffering from something throughout the pandemic, even if it's a mild case of depression.
Mhm. Sure. And I think, like you said, what could families do if they're noticing things? Some might not be so obvious, but, people have reported, of course, increase in drinking alcohol consumption, cannabis consumption, things that people are maybe doing to calm themselves that are not necessarily healthy. And you may be noticing as a family, wow, we're noticing this even increase in drinking or something. And maybe it's just covering up a heightened anxiety about all of this uncertainty that we're experiencing.
So at what point in time, though, as well, now that we're starting to emerge from the pandemic, the restrictions are being loosened, would you anticipate too some of those habits that people created at the beginning of the pandemic to help them deal with the crisis? Would those habits start to decrease and get back to normal?
I mean, I think you'd hope that they would, as people are engaging more socially or they're getting their needs met in other ways and they're feeling better in general, they can return to gyms without masks, things like that. You'd hope that there would be a relief and relaxation associated with those. And so, certainly as a family, if you notice then that they didn't, that those habits stayed even in light of uh, new denominators, then it would be sort of important to address.
Carrie Krawiec with us here on the MegaCast. She's a therapist over at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Just another couple minutes with you here, Carrie. We always appreciate having you on the show because you give us so much insight and knowledge. And with that, anything else maybe that you want the viewers to know before we say goodbye?
I feel like I say this each time we're together, but as therapists, we always think of intensity, frequency, and duration, meaning how long, how big, and how often are you having anxiety about this? And that if it's like, yeah, longer, bigger, and more often, that's certainly a time to get therapy. And if you can see it going down, smaller intensities, lasting less and less time, not happening as often, then you're probably in a good place to move forward. Obviously, if anyone's at any risk of hurting themselves, I always say to be bold and ask bluntly, do you want to hurt yourself? Do you want to die? Do you have thoughts of killing yourself? If you can ask that so upfront, you could really save someone's life.
Oh, such good advice, Carrie, with us. We always appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Again, before we let you go, though, if people want to find out information about the Birmingham Maple Clinic, it's on your website if they maybe want to try to schedule an appointment.
Sure. I'm at birminghammaple.com. We have 39 therapists and psychiatrists. For the treatment of germ anxiety is the best to see both a talk therapist and even maybe consider medication. Also right now, especially for people who are still uncomfortable meeting in person, many of our therapists are meeting via Zoom or telehealth. So there are options to meet every comfort level.
Do you anticipate telehealth is going to stick around?
We sure hope so. It's something that I would hope would benefit the insurance companies, as it would keep people in treatment and less risk of getting sick. And also, mental health is connected to so many other physical ailments. So I hope the insurance companies see a benefit so that they continue to offer it as a service to their clients and
Yeah,
customers.
so many people, it's really been a lifesaver for them throughout the pandemic. Carrie, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.